Okay, so this is part 2 of session 4. And here we're going to look at the first part of the Sermon on the Mount, what I'm calling the commandments. In the last segment, we looked at the structure of the Old Covenant in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. And here we're going to see we're going to do an overview of the parts in the Sermon on the Mount as the New Covenant. And so this first part 2, before we get to the second section, is on the idea of this first section of the commandments, like the 10 commandments, for example. And tonight we're just doing an overview. We will dive in session 5. We're going to dive deep into this particular section to begin with. So first of all, those commandments. In Matthew 5, chapter 3, verse 16, Jesus is setting out the necessary characteristics to be a kingdom person. So if you're going to be a kingdom person, and ultimately if you're going to be in the kingdom when it fills the earth, you're going to inherit this thing, then you're going to have to fulfill these characteristics, right? This is what you have to obey. The Beatitudes contain commandments of character, and we'll see just a couple of quick ones here, and I'm not going to go in depth tonight. I will next time. Matthew chapter 5, verse 7 says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." So in other words, this is a commandment, right? It's stated in a kind of a funny way, but the point is that if you're going to get into the kingdom, you have to be this way. Right? You have to be merciful. If you are, then you will receive mercy and you will enter the kingdom. In verse 9, it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." Again, okay, so the commandment then is to be a peacemaker. You have to be a peacemaker to enter into the kingdom. It's like, don't murder or honor your father and mother. And our commandments are be merciful, be a peacemaker, right? And so there's a number of these what are called Beatitudes that are these core characters. These are, again, I like the phrase commandments of character. Then in the second, somebody's got their thing isn't muted. The second part is salt and light. And we see that the two things that, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light, right? And they contain commandments of consistency, right? That these are not one-time things. You have to consistently be this way. You have to consistently do these things in this life to, the world. You can't be wishy-washy about it. We see in Matthew 5:13, for instance, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, if it's not consistent, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by people." Matthew 5:14 through 15. "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house." So, you have to keep the light out, right? And not, you're not hiding the light, then bringing the light out, then hiding the light again, then bringing the light out again, or have the light out for a while and put it out. It needs to be consistent, and you don't want to be inconsistent. So let's take a look at the rulings section. This is where this is going to come in kind of two parts. The first part is an introduction. And you actually see this occurring in the Book of the Covenant in Exodus and in in Deuteronomy, where you have these kind of transitions. So there's a little bit of a transition here in Matthew 5 as well. So Matthew 5, verses 17 through 20 is a transition and introduction to the next section. So let's read it. Verse 17. "Do not presume that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke of a letter shall pass from the law, until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever nullifies one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness far surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So we can see he's not giving further commandments, right? He's not telling us how, that we need to be necessarily in these specific ways, right? These core commandments. But what follows is going to be these rulings. It's going to be practical ways that these things look like. And he's going to introduce it in some interesting ways. He does a couple of things. The first part is he's going to show us how to fulfill the law. So he says, don't presume that I come to abolish the law or the prophets, which is kind of a way of just saying the Old Testament. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Now, a lot of people are going to interpret this as Jesus was fulfilling the prophecies of the old covenant, but both in context here, as well as the context of the rest of what he's talking about, that doesn't really fit that idea of fulfill. The other way to take this word fulfill is to say, this is how you do it. And a lot of scholars these days, that this is the way they're going to interpret this fulfill. That what he's going to say is, I didn't come to abolish, I came to do and to show you how to do. Right? That's the idea. Fulfilling as in, how do you actually do this? It says, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke of a letter shall pass from the law. Now remember, what is the law? The law is the core of the commandments of the covenant, right? Okay, so it certainly was true under the old covenant that the commandments themselves, those 10 commandments and the additions in Deuteronomy, those have just stood, right? And in the principles behind them will stand forever. But God said in Isaiah and Jeremiah that he was going to make a new covenant, that, doing away with that old covenant because they failed to keep it, and he had to bring about the curses. So he's going to make a new covenant and bring them into that covenant, right? Which is the one we're talking about. Well, that law of the new covenant, really those Beatitudes, that was the heart of what God really wanted in the old covenant. And so it's the way God wanted Adam and Eve to be. And so that's never going to change. That's always going to be true. We're always going to need and want to fulfill this core of commandment. And then you want to let's just read this real quick, that the promise of the new covenant in Jeremiah 31:33 is, for this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them and write it in on their heart, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. This is really what Jesus is introducing in this the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, is this concept right here, that how you fulfill the law is you have to do it from the heart. Whereas the Pharisees were doing it kind of on the outside, but on the inside, as Jesus would say, they're whited sepulchres. They painted nice and white on the outside and all death and bones, on the inside. And it's he's saying you can't do it that way, right? The new covenant, it will be from the heart out, that God's not going to write it on tablets. He's going to write it on their hearts, and the law will be expressed from their heart. And so Jesus is going to then tell us a variety of ways in which of how that looks. Okay, so let's do a quick review of this first section. Sermon is for those who heard the gospel and are interested in following, so that they fully understand the commitment. That's the terms of the covenant. the first section, verses 3 through 16, contains the commandments of the character of kingdom people. And then finally, 17 through 20 is a transition to the section of practical outworking of the commandments. And in the transition, Jesus is telling us that we must keep the commandments. We actually have to do this, right? And that's actually similar to some stuff that's going on in the transition period parts of the Old Covenant. And we'll pick up the rulings, the practical ways in which we work out these commandments that are in the Beatitudes, etc., in the next part.